Hi guys, welcome back. Thank you for completing the Do Now. So we are going to look in this section at some recap info on the concerto through time. I'll do a whistle-stop tour of the main conventions of the three musical periods that we've looked at. And then in the part 2 video of this lesson, we'll do some analysis together. So if we remember from last time, the Baroque period, mainly to do with opulence and showing off and flamboyance. Bach and Vivaldi are your two main composers. Baroque literally means misshapen pearl, which was a term given to the Baroque period after it happened. And it was supposed to be a derogatory term. So the classical people didn't really look at the Baroque period with very much pleasure. Okay, they thought it was overly flamboyant, overly showy, not particularly in line with their morals. So the Baroque period is usually characterised by sort of twiddly, fancy melodies and things like that. Lots of gold in architecture, lots of very flamboyant paintings, etc. Predominantly a string orchestra used, and very prominent is the harpsichord. Now remember that Bach also wrote for the piano, and it was that strange transition period between the use of the harpsichord and the piano. So we're talking about a period of about 100 years. Continuous phrases are constantly used, so one melody bleeds into another melody. Very limited dynamic range, mainly because the instrumentation wasn't robust enough to allow for massive dynamic changes. We see lots of contrapuntal harmony, so one melody flowing into the next and overlapping with each other, sort of the precursor to polyphonic ideas, and the use of canon, whereby one melody is repeated over and over again in different instruments. In comparison to the classical period, which was all about being bold and being strong, it was all about form and structure and balance. So we call this period, really, the technical term is the Neoclassical Period, the New Classical Period, because the actual classical period was in ancient Greek and Rome. The Neoclassical Period is in the 18th century in Western Europe, and its main protagonists are Mozart and Beethoven, so two of the most famous composers of all time exist in the classical period. The orchestra gets a little bit larger, introduction of more woodwind and brass and timpani. In the percussion section, the piano becomes very prominent, and indeed Mozart and Beethoven were both very competent pianists. They were interested in symmetry, they were interested in balanced phrases. It was far less flamboyant than the Baroque period, and we have nice, neat, perfect cadences at the end of each phrase before we move on to the next. Then things change again with the Romantic period. Okay, our main protagonists here: Mahler, Tchaikovsky, Brahms, other composers such as Mendelssohn are really prominent as well, Wagner. The Romantics were very concerned with individual freedom and liberty, as characterised by the painting, which is called Liberty Below, which is about the French Revolution, power to the people. They were also really fascinated by the power of nature. And this is a painting that was really the muse for Mendelssohn's Hebrides pieces. So they wanted to break the rules of the classical period and do things a little bit different, which means that we had a vast range of dynamics to sort of signify emotion and change. We had an ever larger orchestra as technological developments became more innovative. So we had bigger ranges in instruments. We had actually, more instruments available: the trombone, the saxophone, etc. And also the harmony changed. So we started to see a lot more dissonance introduced into the diatonic harmony. We're not quite at the atonal part of the 20th century. However, in the 19th century, which is what we're concerned about here, there was a lot more dissonance. So some clashing chords, some complex sevenths, ninths, elevenths were utilised by these composers to add a degree of nuance and emotion into the pieces that they were creating. Okay, in part 2 of the video, we are going to do a little bit of analysis together. We'll do the first one together, and then you will need to do the second 2. Remember, this is all just recap, guys. This is nothing that we haven't learned before, but we want to try and piece it together in some sort of assessment for the end of the term. Okay, see you in part 2.